Okay, welcome back, folks, to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels or City of Demons, depending on who you want to ask. And we are internationally syndicated, starting with our home base, late night in the Midlands, along with the terrestrial affiliates in the United States and in the United Kingdom, deprogrammed radio with their terrestrial affiliates. As usual, we bring you amazing programming, and today we bring you another two guests, two topics, and we are going to have some very important information that's going to be coming out for you guys. Now, guys and gals, now you know I've had a huge interest in talking to people who've worked for the different security agencies or the alphabet soup agencies. We've had people from the FBI, CIA. You haven't heard the interview yet with this NSA, well, the people call him the NSA whistleblower, but he is recorded since he's in Europe and couldn't do live. We've had people from the Secret Service, CBP, DEA, but there was one specific topic that I wanted to talk about with regards to the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, and that was interrogation. Well, I found the right person for the job. He literally, I mean, one of the really down-to-earth people, has an amazing book out. We were just talking about this before air. It's called Enhanced Interrogation: Inside the Minds and Motives of Islamic Terrorists Trying to Destroy America. And that man is Dr. James E. Mitchell, PhD. Dr. Mitchell, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be aboard.
It's a pleasure to have you on to talk about something so important. Now, before we actually go into interrogation, just to fill the listeners in on what me and you were talking about before, that when I was telling you that what we know about the United States penal system with what we do at Florence, Colorado, and what happens at Gitmo, and then I said something about CIA safe houses, and you corrected me with black sites, but then the conversation shifted to the detainees at Guantanamo Bay, and I was telling you that if they are to be released, they're going to reoffend because now they have this vendetta. They have more vendetta to want to kill Americans. And we had this conversation about that, and you told me something startling. The number of people who have reoffended, who have been released and reoffended, was a third of them?
It's about a third. But I don't know that I agree with you that they have an increased vendetta. You know, they're obliged by their God to use violence to convert, subjugate, slaughter, or enslave everybody on the planet. And my impression isn't that they hate us more because of Gitmo. They use that as a propaganda ploy. But my impression is they hated us before and they hated us afterwards. And when we treat them in ways that suggest that we're bending over backwards to be tolerant, they view that as a weakness. You know, I spent years talking with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and one of the things that he told me was that our civil liberties and our Bill of Rights, that our openness to immigration to other cultures, and that our desire to have the world like us, and our religious freedoms and tolerance and our notions of political correctness were all weapons, that they were all weaknesses that Allah had put in our minds so that we could be defeated, because they're willing to do whatever it takes, whereas we are not willing to do that. And I think this notion that Gitmo creates more terrorists or that Gitmo makes terrorists want to hurt us more just isn't true, because we weren't holding terrorists at Gitmo when they hit us on 9/11, and we weren't holding terrorists at Gitmo when they hit us originally with the first World Trade Center attack, or when they hit the Cole, or when they attacked our embassies in 1998. So they got a lot of blood on their hands before it happens. And I think this notion that by being nicer to them, they're going to be nicer to us is just misguided. Not that you're doing that, but it's something that I've heard people say over and over and over again.
With the people that are involved in these extremist Islamic groups, I hear al-Sharia law is specifically within Islam, the one branch, I guess you could say, of the Islamic religions, because they're really not that different, that really has the vendetta or the wanting to kill Christians, Jewish people, or anybody who's not that kind of Muslim. Do you recognize that al-Sharia Muslims pose the biggest threat because of their belief, like you said, of their God, just saying we have to kill those? others?
Well, it's Sharia supremacy, right? Sharia law is basically just a law that's based on the Quran as it's in its literal reading, the hadiths, which are the perfect words and deeds of the Prophet Muhammad, if you subscribe to that belief, and the legal jurisprudence or the interpretations that were made of religious scholars by what's in the Quran and what's in the hadith. So Sharia law is basically just a system of law that's established on these early beliefs. And those people who are, Salafists are people who believe that the entire world needs to be under Sharia law, and jihadists are Salafists who believe that you should do that through violence. And so when I talk, if you're not a Salafist who wants to subjugate or slaughter or enslave or convert everyone through violence, then I'm just not talking about you. I'm just not. There are, and we need moderate Muslims to work with us, and they have as much as we do to worry about these people who want to impose true Sharia in its most fundamentalist form.
Thank you for actually breaking that down, because I know a lot of people hear al-Sharia and don't really know about Sharia law and jihad. I know for a long time that literally translates to holy war. Again, what we're saying about the achieving their means through violent ends. And again, this is important for people to understand when it comes down to why we have to face this problem and why we as United States citizens have been facing these. And so has the globe. The Western world has really been facing these issues, from France to Spain to the United Kingdom. And it doesn't seem to be coming to an end. But me and you both agreed on something earlier, too, that in the last few years, I think because of our current president, Donald Trump, that we have seen a decline in terrorist activities. You would agree with that, right?
Right. I think we are safer, but not safe, right?
Yes.
And what I mean by that is he has done a lot to push back against the land holdings that they have. And if they can't hold land where they can create biology labs or, WMD labs or set up training camps or use it as like a Fort Apache so that they can go out and perform attacks and then come back, then we're better off. But what they have done, both al-Qa'ida and ISIS and the other variations of it, is they've tried to metastasize into a worldwide counterinsurgency based on Sharia law. And what they're encouraging people to do is to burrow into these parallel societies that a lot of Muslims have set up inside of countries like the United States and the UK and especially Europe to set up the support networks, spread their violent ideology within those parallel societies, and then use that as a base of operation and do soft target attacks that with whatever they happen to have on hand. And in fact, I'll tell you, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the man behind 9/11. And I spent a lot of time talking to him about the kinds of attacks that he was interested in. This is long after harsh interrogations were over. And he said that al-Qaeda still dreamed of these large catastrophic attacks like 9/11, but he himself was thinking that immigrating into the United States and outbreeding U.S. citizens was really the way that they would ultimately bring us down. He said that like-minded jihadi brothers would wrap themselves in our civil liberties for protection after they immigrated to the United States. They would support themselves on our welfare systems, that they would spread this violent ideology inside of these sequestered communities, these parallel communities that are set up. And then when the time was right, that they would raise up and attack us from within. And they said that they would be able to do that because our religious tolerance allowed them to be able to do most of those things before a crime is actually detected.
This is right there is a plan for total infiltration and annihilation within. And just like you said, because of our religion's tolerances to allow these and having these welfare systems in place that they want to come to abuse and to outbreed the United States citizens and therefore create citizens of their own that belong to the United States, that would cause a civil war of unprecedented heights. So I guess the best thing would I would hope right now this different surveillance by the different agencies is really monitoring this. And I do know that one of the things that Trump talked about when he was campaigning was restricting those coming in from those terrorist countries. I guess only time will let us tell. Now, let me wind the clock back a little bit, Dr. Mitchell, to August 2002. Actually, let's go back even further to January 22nd. No, that was the end. Okay, let's go back to August 2002. What happened with Barack Obama, which changed the way the CIA did interrogations?
I'm sorry, you said Barack Obama in August of 2002?
No, I'm sorry. That would have been the president. Sorry, he ended it 2009. 2002 was George Walker Bush. So he began some advanced interrogation techniques from an executive order, correct?
Well, what actually happened was that when it became clear that the CIA and the FBI weren't going to be able to get the information out of Abu Zubaydah that was necessary to stop this plot that they had good evidence to believe was in place. I think what a lot of people do is they forgot the context in which the EIT program was developed. One of the things that the CIA knew is that Osama bin Laden had met with the Pakistani scientists who were passing out the nuclear technology to some of these rogue states. And Osama bin Laden had asked this scientist, how long will it take to make a nuclear weapon? And the scientist said, the problem is getting the fissionable material. That's what's going to take the most time. And he said, what if we've already got it? How long would it take us to make a nuclear weapon then? And, that sent chills throughout the intelligence community. And at the same time, there's a lot of chatter about this second wave of catastrophic attacks that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had planned. And in fact, he did have another set of attacks planned with a man named Hambali. Hambali had already picked out, I think, 17 or 18 Malaysian males because they knew we'd be looking for Arabs. And they were teaching them hand-to-hand combat because they knew after what had happened at United Flight 93 that they were going to have to fight the passengers, that the Americans weren't just going to go to their deaths like some of them had done in the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, that they were actually going to fight back. And they were intending to crash airplanes into the tallest buildings in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Seattle. That was their plan. Now, we didn't know it at the time. It just felt like we were in a run and gun battle. We were hearing a lot of chatter about this impending catastrophic attack and the notion that it was already looming, if not imminent, if that's, it felt like it was going to happen at any particular point, and they were doing everything they could do to stop it. And so what happened when it looked like the sort of standard law enforcement approach to interrogation wasn't going to produce the intelligence that was required to stop that upcoming attack. The president wasn't going to let some terrorist set off a biological weapon or a nuclear weapon in one of our cities. They was going to do whatever it took to stop that. As long as it was legal, they were going to walk right up to the line and put their toes on the line. And so when the CIA made it clear to me that they were actually going to use physical coercion against Abu Zubaydah, who was their best chance at catching some of these people who were planning this attack, then I recommended to them that if they were going to do that, if they had intended to do that, if that's what they were actually going to do, rather than making it up on the fly, they should consider using some of the training techniques that we had used in our advanced courses to teach Americans how to resist interrogation. Now, there were two reasons that I did that, and most people tend to overlook that. The first reason is that the Americans had been doing it, including waterboarding to our own people, for over 50 years without any injuries or death, any substantial injuries or deaths. And the resistance to interrogation techniques that al-Qa'ida were teaching its own people were based on what the U.S. had taught its fighting men and women to resist interrogation. So there was a link there that made those techniques more suitable, because I had spent 13 years working in this resistance to interrogation community, and it was clear to me that people who had no reason to talk during training exercises, people who would lose their job, whose careers would be completely disrupted, did in fact tell secrets that they weren't supposed to tell when they were confronted with some of these enhanced interrogations, and they did it relatively quickly.
Following the attacks of 9/11, I remember that the security was increased. Of course, more people were scared in the Los Angeles area, clearly because of the fact that what had already happened in New York, Philadelphia, and or Shanksville, Pennsylvania, as well as the Pentagon. But here in Los Angeles, hitting LAX with, like you said, either a nuclear weapon or a biological weapon, because of the sheer amount of population that people live in, literally the city of Los Angeles, the blast radius of a nuclear weapon would annihilate millions of people, I think, long before you even get to the fallout, the nuclear fallout that would happen in months, or the nuclear winter afterwards. And I just remember those were very, very scary times. And clearly the work that people such as yourselves were doing were actually saving lives, that we didn't see these levels of attacks here in the United States since then. And I guess the best thing to do is pray to God that this never happens again, and to thank you for your service, Dr. Mitchell. Now, let's talk about the actual interrogation techniques. You mentioned waterboarding. Was that one of the first things they taught you that is acceptable to, like you said, take it up to the line, don't cross the line, but time to literally step up the game to say, okay, enough's enough. We're bringing it up to the full weight of the law. We're not going to break it, but this is now a new standard we're going to use.
Well, I think that what folks need to know about the enhanced interrogation program, all the techniques that were used, and I will be the first to acknowledge that some techniques were used that should not have been used, but they weren't used by me and Dr. Jessen. But they were approved by the president. They were briefed to the National Security Council. They were judged legal by the Department of Justice. They were approved by name by the CIA for each and every terrorist that they were used on, and they were monitored by medical personnel. In addition to that, they were briefed to the senior leadership in Congress, some of whom said, is that enough? Is that all you're going to do? Because it doesn't really seem like that would be enough to stop these attacks, you know. But the CIA said in their pushback to the one-sided Feinstein report that it helped disrupt plots, that it helped capture terrorists, that it gave a better understanding of the al-Qaeda's leadership, because at that time we knew very little about it in early 2001, late 2001 and early 2002, that it prevented several catastrophic attacks and that it helped save lives. And that was the same determination that the minorities group in the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence said as well. So, you know, quibbling about the, you know, is this technique legal? Was this technique legal? I know the laws have changed since then, but it went through not one adjudication, not one, but four. And in fact, I waterboarded almost as many lawyers as I did terrorists. You know, in the run-up to decide, the last time they decided that waterboarding was legal, the Assistant Attorney General, whose job it was to decide whether or not it was legal, had the CIA waterboarding, and I did that waterboarding. And in addition to that, I waterboarded a female CIA lawyer who would not stand by and let the Assistant Attorney General be waterboarded until she got waterboarded. So I'm just one lawyer down. Only three terrorists were waterboarded: Abu Zubaydah, KSM, and al-Nashiri, the man behind USS Cole attack. So, and the other thing that I think that people don't have a good handle on when they think about those enhanced interrogation techniques is that the whole period in which a person was exposed to those techniques was relatively short. Abu Zubaydah, who was the first capture, he was subjected to somewhere around 14 to 17 days of enhanced interrogation, depending on whether you count the days that he could have been interrogated with them and wasn't as part of that total. But he went on to work with us for another 1,623 days, where he was relatively cooperative and provided a tremendous amount of intelligence. Same thing was true for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the man behind the 9/11. He was subjected to harsh interrogations for 21 days, and he went on to work with us for another 1,285 days. That's 3 weeks of hard interrogation, 170 weeks of being relatively cooperative. So, I think in terms of the payoff, it was worth it. The other thing that I think that people don't understand about the way that enhanced interrogations were used when they were used at their best is that there were basically two schools of thought at the CIA at the time. There was those people who thought that you subjected people to EITs and you told them what you wanted to know, and then you took that information, you continued to subject them to EITs, and if they changed their story, then they were lying in the first place. And that's not the way Dr. Jessen and I thought about this at all. The way we thought about it is that a terrorist, when he comes into a situation where he's going to be interrogated, he has a set of priorities, and those priorities drive his intentions in the moment. And so what we wanted to do was put them in a situation where they would voluntarily start to look for information that they could provide us that we could verify. And the way that we did this was we did an initial neutral assessment where, because I look like somebody's uncle and not like an interrogator, I would go in and have a very neutral, calm talk with the person and tell them what we wanted to know. And if they talk to us, no enhanced interrogations at all. Things got good for them. And there were several high-value detainees that did that. If they didn't talk to us, I would leave them with what we call a bridging question, which is, I would say, the next time someone talks to you, they're going to ask you this question. And if you answer this question, then things will be fine. And then after some period of time where they have a chance to think about it, the bridging question is asked. If enhanced interrogations are going to be used, they're used. And then there's another bridging question at the end of that session. And then immediately follows what we call a fireside chat, where we talk to the person about what their experience of being interrogated was. And we tell them the interrogation is over. We really just want to talk to you about, how your reactions to it and give you some feedback about, whether we believe what you're telling us or not. But in fact, the interrogation wasn't over. And very often people would reveal intelligence during this period of time when they didn't think that the interrogation was taking place. The other time that we would see intelligence come out so that we could shift away from the harsh interrogation techniques is the next time they encountered that bridging question. So, for example, imagine a person who has a dental phobia. The closer you get to your appointment to the dentist, the harder you try to get out of it. So we never expected them to provide the intelligence during the EITs, although we would have taken it, and we always stopped the enhanced interrogations if they did that. We really thought that they would begin to cooperate just before the session started, and they would do their best to avoid it. And in fact, when they did that, we could then shift to, sort of standard law enforcement and standard social influence things.
I think because of your down-to-earth personality, your background in psychology, understanding the way the mind works, you going in there and building the rapport as opposed to others who have gone in there with a preconceived notion that, okay, this terrorist or this detainee does not or is not going to play ball the way I'm going to, or the way I'd like him to. Therefore, let's just jump to the interrogation, as opposed to where a lot of people ended up working with you without getting these interrogations at all. And when you just mentioned weighing versus what the performing these interrogations versus the results. I mean, what you just mentioned with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other gentleman, for the, what you said, 3 weeks versus 107, 3 weeks of interrogation for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed versus 172 weeks of cooperation, that is tangible results that what you were doing was working.
Well, I can give you some actual numbers. There were 39 high-value detainees that received enhanced interrogations. 82% of those people who received enhanced interrogations provided what's called sole source disseminable intelligence reports, meaning an intelligence report that's attributed only to them, that goes out to the career field that has real information in it, right? Whereas there were a similar group of people, 90, who did not receive EITs, and of those, only 57% provided any sole source intelligence report. So there was an 82% success rate versus a 57% success rate for the no EITs. And in addition to that, if you dig down closer and you look at it closer, the overall number of intelligence reports that came from the 32 people who were subjected to EITs were 4,266, whereas there were only 1,608 that came from the group that had no EITs. And of that group that get EITs, I've been talking about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abu Zubaydah and saying that they were relatively cooperative. By themselves, they produced 1,597 sole source disseminable intelligence reports. That's only 9 reports fewer than the 46 in the EIT node division. So it's clear if you just look at it from a quantitative point of view, and then you look at the success that we had in capturing and stopping attacks that came from that program, then it's clear that they were effective, even if people would like to pretend they're not. And at least you think I'm cooking those numbers. Those are Feinstein's numbers, not my numbers. They're in a footnote in that sort of one-sided, horrible, not broke out the way that I broke it out. She said that of the 39 people, it didn't work because 7 of them made no reports at all. Well, that's bull because, as I said, 82% of them did. And so we ended up with a much higher success rate than the no EITs group, who were based primarily on rapport and just simply the tea and cookies and making them feel better. I feel compelled to say one other thing that you mentioned. You mentioned the importance of rapport, and I would be remiss, I think, as both a psychologist and an interrogator, if I didn't say to you that rapport was necessary but not sufficient. And rapport doesn't mean liking. What it means is a psychological connection to the other person, and that rapport can be the sort of rapport that 2 weary warriors have, which is the way that we approached it. So rapport is necessary but not sufficient to get what we needed.
Would you say that the rapport that you were building with these detainees actually ended up with the ones that were cooperating? Did you notice that there was some respect coming from them towards you?
Well, this whole group of folks, the jihadists don't respect you trying to make them like you by being super nice to them. You know, they will take that, but they view that, like I said, they typically view that as a weakness.
Yeah.
UBL said people are attracted to the strong horse. They're not attracted to people who look weak. And in fact, the thing that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed can do better than any other terrorist that I interrogated, and I interrogated more than 16, I think in my book I said 14, but actually it was 16 of the highest level al-Qa'ida terrorists and that were captured at the time, and terrorists from other groups that they had. And the thing that I learned from them is that the leadership, they will take this tolerance, and they're extremely good at using our complacency and our desire to have the world like us as a weapon against us.
Now, one thing that you mentioned earlier was, for instance, when you talked about the congressman and congresswoman who knew about this and were saying, is it enough? I remember one person who, to this day, a more recent interview with former Vice President Dick Cheney, wanted, to bring the full weight of the law and the more techniques. Did you get that impression from the executive branch that the vice president was offering different ideas or bring in other intelligence officials to say, hey, there's different techniques that we should employ that we haven't explored yet?
The way you phrase that question, I don't have an answer for you because I never talked to the vice president, and no one ever said this is what the vice president wants to do. Gotcha. Here's what I would say to you. In a situation where we're in a running street battle with a group of terrorists who want to destroy our cities, I'm not talking about kill 1 or 2 people on a bus. I'm talking about bring down buildings or
Yeah.
kill hundreds, maybe thousands of people, then what you would want of your government is that they would consider every legal way to stop it. And in the course of doing that, some things would get suggested that when they thought about it, like this truth serum thing that came out recently, that when they thought about it, they would say, no, we're not going to do that because we don't think that A, it's not effective and the way people think, because all it does is make people more suggestible, and B, it may not be legal given that using mind-altering substances during questioning people are illegal. But what you should keep in mind is that they made the right decision to not use it rather than that came up during the conversation. There's a difference between thinking outside of the box and sorting through what the options are and actually implementing those options.
I'm actually glad you brought up the truth serum. Again, this goes back to what we were talking about off air about the other guest who was written that book about his experiences in Princeton in the 60s. And again, to dispel the myth that truth serums are in fact used. You just spelled out why they're not. We legally cannot affect their state of mind, their consciousness by getting them drunk or anything like that. Just again, since you just said it, for the people once and for all listening, just dispel the myth that there is no truth serum and we do not use it in any sect of the United States government.
Well, what happens with those kinds of drugs is that they make you highly susceptible, right? Highly suggestible. And so depending on how the question is asked, if you ask the question to a person who is simply trying to please you in a way that suggests the answer that you're looking for, there's a high probability that they're going to provide that answer. It's a problem that you can't overcome. And secondarily, it actually is against American law to use mind-altering substances like getting people drunk and question detainees, whether they're legal combatants or illegal combatants, unlawful combatants. So they would have had to get some sort of rereading of the law from the Justice Department in order to do that. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't have been put on the table and then taken off the table once they thought it through. It's the same reason that Dr. Justin and I didn't use coercion in the first way that I told you. You know, if you hurt a person and tell that person what you want to hear, they're going to tell you what you want to hear. If you ask leading questions, even if you do it in such a way that you don't think that you're asking leading questions, but the adjectives and the verbs that you use actually pull for a certain kind of answer, you're going to get a garbage response that doesn't help stop the next attack. And the reason that we know that the CIA did it successfully and that the way that the enhanced interrogation was used by Dr. Justin and myself and some of the other folks that were involved in the program is that they actually used the information that came out of that program to capture and kill and disrupt additional plots, capture and kill the terrorists who were trying to destroy our way of life and disrupt additional plots. And if you want an example, I can give you an example.
Absolutely.
I can give you the example of finding bin Laden, for example. Now, a brilliant analyst was able to ID the courier and that courier's true name and location using information that came out of the enhanced interrogation program and some other information that was at hand. You know, the first person that mentioned the man we knew as Abu Ahmed al-Qawaidi, who was the UBL's courier that eventually led the CIA to where he was at, was a guy by the name of Amar Baluchi. Amar Baluchi was one of the people who attacked us on 9/11, working with his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And Amar Baluchi said that Abu Ahmed delivered that KSM had told him that Abu Ahmed al-Qawaidi delivered letters for UBL. And so because they were, held in close proximity, we went to KSM and asked KSM, what's this your nephew is telling us about Abu Ahmed al-Qawaidi delivering letters for UBL? And KSM lied to us. He said, oh no, that guy used to work for me, but he retired in 2001. But then he did something that gave his lie away. they thought they had a means of secretly communicating with each other. And in that, but we let them continue to do that because we wanted to monitor what they were saying to each other, right? So they didn't know that we knew that there's technique, and they didn't know that we monitored it. Well, in that secret way that they had of communicating to each other, KSM sent a word out to the other detainees: whatever you do, don't tell them about Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti being a courier, right? Or don't tell them about the courier. And so that actually made people more interested in Abu Ahmed as a courier than before. And then at the same time, there was a guy by the name of Hassan Gul, who was a well-placed facilitator who arranged money and movement. He was like a logistics person or a fixer for al-Qa'ida. And before enhanced interrogations, and I should say that Amar Baluchi and KSM were both subjected to enhanced interrogation, but the information that we got from them about UBL, about the courier, came long after enhanced interrogations were over for both of them. But Hassan Gul was a guy who, before enhanced interrogation, said, yeah, there's a guy named Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, but, you know, he may be one of several people, 3, 4, I don't know, people who may or may not be delivering letters for UBL. But then after enhanced interrogations, he said, that's the guy who delivers letters for UBL. I've given him letters for UBL, and I've taken letters from him for UBL. So we had some additional information. And then there was a final guy that I interrogated named Abu Yasser al-Jazeera, who, after EITs, told us that Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti had a speech impediment, and that he talked in Arabic and I think Pashto or Urdu. I can't remember which one right now, but he talked in Arabic and Pashto as kind of a word salad, that he mixed everything up, and that if you didn't speak those two languages and you didn't realize that he was switching back and forth between those languages randomly in a way that he couldn't control, he sounded like he was crazy. And so what happened is, through technical means, they were able to locate that man and follow him to the compound. So the information that provided a cornerstone. Now, all of it didn't come. Though, to get to his true name, there was a man who had reported that there was an Abu Ahmed Kuwaiti and had a piece of his true name who was not subjected to enhanced interrogations. But what they conveniently leave out, the critics of the program conveniently leave out, is that he thought this man was dead. He thought this man was dead, but it turned out it was Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti's brother. And once the analysts were able to piece that together, then they were able to figure out the true name of Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti and use that to get the information that was used finally to locate UBL. And a lot of that information, not all of it, but a lot of that information came out of the enhanced interrogation program, and it was put together by a brilliant analyst and analytical team who was able to put this puzzle together really without seeing the picture on the box. So it's easy for someone like Senator Feinstein to look back in time 17 years later and say, I could have done it better, I could have done it quicker, I could have used different information. But she wasn't there, her staff wasn't there, and the agency used the agency they actually used, you know, and it was successful.
There's a couple points I want to make on things you said. First of all, this is something I should have said from the very get-go, and I'm hoping you can confirm it, as I do have with other people who worked for the agency. Unlike what spy movies or Hollywood is showing people that watch it about what's going on with the CIA legally cannot operate within domestic borders without a domestic agency attached, such as the FBI or DIA. Is that correct?
My understanding.
Okay, excellent. I'm glad you brought that up. Now, another thing, that law that we cannot affect their brain, like you said, getting them drunk or anything like that for the truth serums. I know that the lawyers of the people who are going for the human rights groups against, or that represent the detainees at Guantanamo Bay, are they ever arguing that the area of law is actually gray, and then therefore that by having sensory deprivation, that this causes their state of mind to be affected in the same way as possibly getting him drunk? Have you ever encountered anything like that?
I don't know what I'm not at Gitmo, and I'm not a part of those military commissions, and I haven't heard any of their arguments. So I wouldn't be I wouldn't put it past them, but I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be the person to ask. Here's what I can tell you is that every interrogation that was done was monitored by medical personnel and a psychologist, not me or Dr. Jessen, who did the interrogations, a psychologist whose job it was to prevent that from happening. Anyone and everyone could stop any interrogation at any time without any blowback because they wanted to be safe. And so they had people whose specific job was to prevent the kind of changes in the cognitive state, we call it level of consciousness or any of that other sort of stuff, including sleep deprivation, that would produce the kind of effects that you're asking me about. So regardless of what the lawyers want to argue, the fact is that they had physicians and physician assistants and nurses whose job it was to every day give medical briefings back to CIA headquarters, back to the counterterrorist center, and to us every day before we started any of those enhanced interrogations, and afterwards as well. So in some cases, they would go in and examine the terrorists before and after to be sure that they were, not placed in any jeopardy. In fact, the terrorists got better medical care and better psychological care than most of our own citizens, especially more care from the government than the victims of 9/11 did, the families of 9/11 did. But I feel, since we don't have a lot of time left, that there's something that I really want to point out.
Sure.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed told me that they attempted to decapitate the United States by crashing airplanes into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and he said the Capitol building. Some people say the White House, but the guy who actually targeted it said the Capitol building. And the confusion is because he said that white building, right? But in terms of what his targets were, he told me that those were really not the real targets, that the target is the mind of the American people, that it's a war of ideas. And they felt like if they could make Americans afraid enough, then we would badger our political folks to stop resisting the spread of Sharia in other countries, that we would have them, like we did in the Vietnam War, where we won the battle on the ground and lost the battle of public opinion, right? That what we would do is get our folks to pull out of the Middle East, and then they would be able to establish a caliphate there that they could then use. And, what he said was that the mainstream media was going to help them do that, because what they would do is they would say that the war against Islam, and that was his words, not my words, that the war against Islam was immoral, that the newspapers and the media would say it was immoral, it was wrong, it was ineffective, that it was producing more terrorists, and that those things that they were likely to say were gifts that their God had provided that were essentially defeat mechanisms that they could use against us. He said that the media would help them tear down the things that were put in place by President Bush. He called him that cowboy, George Bush, that had kept us safe, and that when they did, we would become complacent, and they would use that complacency to set off another catastrophic attack.
You mentioned the target of them was the minds of American people, and I tend to agree that I think they might have succeeded, because the fear amongst United States citizens following 9/11 of another attack being imminent was so great. I remember lots of people were not flying if they didn't have to. They would limit their activities. The fear really shot up. So in your objective mind, do you think that they achieved that goal, at least for that period?
No, because what he didn't count on was that we'd put a boot in his backside. What he thought was that America would, they based what they thought they could get away with on what previous presidents had done. I asked him one time, what were you thinking, Dr. Jessen and I did, what were you thinking when you hit the United States? When you knocked down the World Trade Center, what were you thinking? Like you would ask a kid, you come home from away for the weekend and your son has had a party in the house and broke furniture and started a fire in the kitchen. And you think, what are you thinking? What did you think I was going to do when I got home? And he said, well, first off, they didn't expect that the World Trade Center would collapse. And when it did collapse, he thought that there was a sign from Allah that God was on their side, and that the fire and the misery of that would be a beacon to other like-minded jihadists who would raise up and attack America while we were still reeling. And he said, as for what Americans would do, I thought Americans would do what they always did. I thought they would turn tail and run. In 93, the Hezbollah blew up the Marine barracks in Lebanon. Reagan turned tail and run. He just pulled out. In 1998, al-Qa'ida blew up 2 U.S. embassies, one in Tanzania, one in Africa. And again, they turned it over to the FBI. They made it a law enforcement issue, and nothing of substance happened other than they fired missiles at a couple of abandoned training camps. And then in 2000, they did the USS Cole, and again, they made it a law enforcement issue, turned it over to the FBI, and they started looking for the culprits who had actually done it. He said, so I thought you would do what you always did. Well, I thought that what President Bush would do is he would turn it over to the FBI. There would be this long investigation while they tried to figure out who actually did it. You would ask the Taliban who were running Afghanistan eventually to extradite KSM and the crew. When you found out who it was, the Taliban would refuse, and we would have time to pull off that second wave of catastrophic attacks. And then he kind of looked at the ground and put his hands in his head, and he looked up and said, how was I supposed to know that cowboy George Bush would say he wanted us dead or alive and invade Afghanistan to get us? And so initially, the thing that saved us from that second catastrophic attack was George Bush treating it like an act of war rather than a law enforcement issue to be pursued by the FBI. That got him off balance. That kept him on the run until the CIA could start, and the other intelligence communities in the military could start capturing these terrorists and finally disrupt this catastrophic attack, the second wave of attacks that he already had in the works. And let me point out one other thing that he said. He said he had people already in America ready to do harassing attacks to keep us focused on it. One of the plans he had was for a person to blow up gas stations up and down the east coast of the United States simultaneously. And he actually had a man on the ground who had a gas route delivering gas to these gas stations. And they were simply trying to work out the fusing so that they would be able to create as much death and destruction as possible. And the information from the enhanced interrogation informed the FBI's case and was used to get that guy to plead guilty. So, again, there's a lot about this that Americans don't know.
And this again goes back to what I was telling you earlier. We Americans and our allies are very indebted to you, Dr. Mitchell, and people such as yourself that foiled these attacks that we didn't even know. And again, it's probably, if we had more time, you could probably tell more different attacks that were foiled, that were so imminent, with people being here, as you mentioned, blowing up these gas stations up and down the East Coast. If they already had their man who already had a gas delivery schedule, I mean, it sounds to me they were literally on the cusp of pulling this off, and Lord only knows what else we don't know, which is in your book, and we'll be able to pull out through other interviews, because like I told you earlier, Dr. Mitchell, I knew 1 hour is not going to be enough. Now, because I want to at least cover what else we could, you were part of this George Bush's executive order to have these enhanced techniques, which began a little over just actually under a year from 9/11 in August 2002. And it ended literally, I believe, was it 2 days after Barack Obama became president, after being president-elect after his inauguration on January 22nd, 2009. What, at least in the agency, or did your superiors tell you, was the reasoning to stop this program?
Obama didn't like it.
Even though it netted the results?
I don't speak for the man. You'd have to ask President Obama. But I think he made us less safe in what he did. Yes. Because at that particular point, we had already written a non-coercive interrogation manual. I think that you do need an intelligence-focused interrogation program with the full range of lawful techniques, including deception and technical collection and some form of psychological lawful coercion, for that handful of senior terrorists and knowledgeable facilitators who are captured outside of the United States. You know, one of the things that very much disappointed me is that I spoke to KSM just before he was moved to Guantanamo in 2006, and he said that he was ready to martyr himself, and that when he got to Guantanamo, he was going to, tell people about the attacks that he did. And during one of the military commission hearings, he listed a number of like 20 different attacks, or 28 different attacks, or 32, depending on how you count it, that he was responsible for, including Daniel Pearl, right, and 9/11 and several other attacks. Well, and they were going to plead guilty. All of the people who had worked for him were going to plead guilty. But Barack Obama set aside their confession and set aside their conviction so that he could try them in New York City, because he wanted to put his own stink on it. He wanted to be the man who tried them. Well, I know Khalid Sheikh Mohammed very well because I spent hundreds, maybe thousands, years with that guy. And what he thought was that was his God. He had told his God, I'm ready for paradise. Take me into paradise. And his God got the president to set aside his criminal indictment so that he could be, and he thinks that's his God telling him to drag this out as long as possible. And it's gotten to the point where they haven't even got past the pretrial motions. Once they got back to Guantanamo and they went back to military commissions because they couldn't do it in New York, he has dragged it out and dragged it out and dragged it out. And I personally believe that cheats justice, that it cheats the victims, the survivors of the people who were killed on 9/11 and the ones who were killed in terrorist attacks on the Cole and other people, out of the rightful justice that they have, because Obama's narcissistic ego made him want to try it in New York so he could take credit for it.
And again, like you said earlier, clearly that by him doing things like that, ending this program is why I think we had more incidents of terrorist attacks under President Obama, which Trump during his campaign was making a hardline attack for it. And I would not be surprised if he has an executive order at some point, or if there is something that is classified that he's sort of re-emerging this program, which you've shown has netted actual results. Now, Dr. Mitchell, we have a little over 5 minutes left. And I was going to say, anything you want to talk about right now would be, it's open floor for you.
Yeah, I doubt that they're going to use anything like enhanced interrogations again, not until there's another catastrophic attack. And then the very people who are saying you're horrible for doing it will be screaming that we didn't do enough to protect them, just like they did after 9/11. But I think there are at least 3 takeaways that I would suggest that people keep in mind. And one is, it's the danger of political correctness, that the terrorists view our rights and freedoms as cloaking devices that allow them to operate in our midst without being detected, and weapons that their God has placed in our minds so that they can beat us. The other thing is this risk of open borders and the poor vetting of people and chain migration and anchor babies that can bring lots of people over that we don't vet. We need to do a better job of controlling our borders, or we're going to end up like Europe, where we have these stovepipe communities where police need military escorts just to go and make an ordinary arrest. And then there does need to be an intelligence-focused detention and interrogation program and I don't care who does it, I don't care where it's located, I don't care what organization it has. But if we're not questioning the senior guys who are trying to kill us, then we are just wrong.
Let me ask you these are broad questions. What's next for you? You've had a very, very decorated career in the United States Air Force. I believe, is it 22 years as a lieutenant colonel is what you retired as, and then you joined the agency. Have you considered going back either as a private military contractor or seeking a more senior position such as national security advisor or maybe CIA director or anything like that?
You got to be kidding. The one thing that Feinstein was successful at was demonizing. They did to me and Dr. Jessen what they tried to do to Judge Kavanaugh. They demonized us in the press. And they made it so that just within the intelligence community, people who were my close friends no longer contact us. Now, I know that the people on the other side will say, boo-hoo, boo-hoo, you know, and they're free to do that. But this suggesting that we're going to get back involved again. Hell, some of the military organizations that I spent years with aren't even allowed to talk to me because of the way that Dr. Justin and I have been thrown under the bus by our own government afterwards. So, no, I don't see myself doing that. Here's what I'm actually doing is I'm an old guy that's an ice climber and a rock climber and an alpinist and a canyoneer, and that's what I'm doing. I'm spending more time climbing and less time worrying about what's going on in politics because, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed told me that eventually America will expose her neck to them for slaughter because we won't do what needs to be done to protect ourselves while they will do anything it takes to kill us. And in my mind, that responsibility lies with the people who are currently in our government. If they want our help, I'll be happy to help, right? I'd be happy to do it. But if they don't want my help, then they're under the gun to prevent these kinds of things from happening. And if they fail to do that, I'm going to be one of the first ones showing up on the news talking about what a crappy job they did.
And like you talked about with Barack Obama, trying to bring or dismiss the indictments to bring Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to New York, it seems to me that a Democratic president as opposed to a Republican president would actually expose us for more attacks, just like you mentioned. And that's just my personal opinion. Is this an opinion of yours as well, that if we had a Democratic president as opposed to, by the way, I say Dems as opposed to Democratic because it seems to me they lost their democracy. That's a whole nother conversation about socialism. But do you feel that if there was another president that was of the same party as Obama would make us less safe?
I don't care what party they're in. What I care about is what they're going to do to protect America's lives. And so if you're from a party that advocates open borders, that advocates not tracking people who are in our country illegally, who could pull off these kinds of attacks, who think we should take in thousands of refugees from countries that breed terrorists, that we should welcome back previous ISIS fighters, that we should provide social support and preferential housing for terrorists who claim that they want to turn over a new leaf, then I don't think you should be president. And I don't care whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat. I think it's the issues that you have to look at. But the truth is, right now, it's the Republicans who are protecting America, not the Democrats.
Thank you. Well said. And like you said, again, it doesn't matter which side you are. It's what they actually do to protect American lives. Now, this is, again, since we're coming out of time, and I do want to spend time on your book real quick, a very broad statement, Dr. Mitchell, for any listener out there who's young enough of thinking of career options, who may have just finished being in the military and is looking at possibly working in the intelligence field. What would you say to people who are interested in working in the CIA or possibly NSA?
Become a CIA officer, because if you're a CIA officer, you're immune. If you're a contractor, you are not. And if you're a CIA contractor or an intelligence community contractor or some sort of a contractor that does aggressive special operations, a civilian contractor, then you better have indemnification, and damn good indemnification, because they're going to come after you. And the government will live up to the letter of their agreement, but not the spirit of their agreement. And so while the men and women at the CIA did not turn their backs on me and Dr. Justin, and they lived up to the letter of their indemnification, the political appointees like Brennan were in the back pocket of Obama and the other people that were sliming us.
Yes. Well said. And again, like you said, it's important for people to, if they're going to do this, as opposed to being private military contractors, PMCs, which I do have one in my own family, being an actual CIA officer, you get the immunity, like you just mentioned, which is key, because otherwise you can have a change of president who all of a sudden you're the person who's in the hot seat when all you did was your job and saved American lives. It's things like that that make me angry when people like yourself do your job to save American lives, and then at the end, like you said, people aren't talking to you the way it's just a very sad situation, Dr. Mitchell. You absolutely have sympathy for me. Since we've gone a little overboard as far as time, and you do know I mentioned before earlier, I would love to have you on to talk about this further. Let's plug in your book a little bit. Enhanced Interrogation: Inside the Minds and Motives of the Islamic Terrorists Trying to Destroy America. 3 years ago, it was published. And where can people find it? Amazon, I would think, of course, and other bookstores and Barnes and Noble, Borders, things like that?
Yeah, it's sold out right now at Amazon. But you know, they still have the audio book, and I didn't do the voiceover for the audio book, someone else did, but the audio book is actually quite enjoyable. And of course it's available on Kindle and other you know, other means of reading it on mobile devices. So hopefully people who are interested can contact Barnes and Noble or contact Amazon, because like I said, it just says temporarily out of stock. I looked at it before I came on, and I guess that's a good thing, because it means that they're sold out of those books temporarily.
Yeah, yeah. And on my website, Dr. Mitchell, in your biography, there is a picture of the book that I believe is a hot link. So once there's more copies available, if people are looking for the actual book, like physical, tangible book, as opposed to buying it on Kindle or the audio book right now, everybody, it is available on drjradiolive.com. You cannot miss it. Like I said, it's in Dr. James Mitchell's biography. With that being said, Dr. Mitchell, thank you so much for your time. I do look forward to having you back on. It has truly been an honor and an eye-opening experience for filling me with this information that was only speculation. And like I said, I've talked to other people from the agency on this show, and of course our chats off the show, and you've actually filled in a lot more information in this hour than I've had with the several hours with other people combined. So for that, I'm deeply indebted to you, Dr. Mitchell. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, stay tuned. When we come back from break, we're going to speak to Mr. Joseph Flynn, who is the brother of General Michael Flynn. Everybody hang tight. We'll be right back in a couple short minutes with another guest.